Sarah Monroe pressed the last bobby pin into place, glancing at her reflection in the cracked mirror that hung above the tiny sink in her Brooklyn studio. Her hair was neatly tucked into a bun, and the blush she'd applied just barely concealed the fatigue that clung to her like second skin. She hadn't slept more than 4 hours in the past 3 nights, juggling pre-med night classes, and now this job. But none of that mattered. Today was only her 3rd shift at Léon, and she was determined to keep it. Outside, Manhattan buzzed like a hive on espresso. Tourists snapped photos in front of St. Patrick's Cathedral, just across the street from the restaurant's gleaming windows. Inside Léon, it was all marble, chandeliers, and softly clinking crystal. The kind of place where the menu had no prices and the guests didn't ask questions. Sarah moved like clockwork between tables, balancing trays with a grace that belied her aching arms. Her table assignments had been routine so far: hedge funders with impatient wives, influencers treating every bite like a photo shoot. But when the hostess whispered, "Table 12 is yours," something shifted. Table 12 sat near the cathedral-facing windows, its view framed by golden daylight and stained glass reflections. And seated at its center was Elizabeth Smith. Even Sarah, who barely had time for gossip columns, recognized the woman. Elizabeth's face had graced the covers of Vogue and Forbes, her icy blue eyes as notorious as her designer wardrobes. Her husband had died years ago, and she'd since become a symbol of Manhattan's elite, a socialite who threw charity balls for causes she didn't understand and ruined waiters for mispronouncing French wine. Sarah walked up with her notepad, smile practiced but genuine. "Good afternoon, ladies. Welcome to Léon. Can I start you off with sparkling or still—" Elizabeth looked up and wrinkled her nose. "God," she muttered, loud enough for the table to hear. "What is that smell?" One of the other women at the table stifled a laugh. Another took a slow sip of wine, her eyes flicking over Sarah's uniform. "I think it's fabric softener," Elizabeth said, inspecting Sarah like a museum piece. "Or maybe it's just cheap laundry detergent. Either way, off-putting." The words landed like a slap. Sarah's stomach twisted, but she said nothing. She couldn't. She needed this job more than she needed her pride. "I'll come back in a moment," Sarah said quietly, turning away. But Elizabeth wasn't done. "Oh, no, dear. We're ready to order. I'd hate to delay your busy day of, folding towels and scrubbing floors?" Her friends laughed again. Sarah's fingers tightened around her notepad. Then, with a flick of her manicured fingers, Elizabeth reached for her plate, a beautiful porcelain dish with duck confit and truffle potatoes, and dropped it. It shattered. A collective gasp rippled through the dining room. The sound of breaking china rang louder than the piano music in the background. Every head turned. "Oops," Elizabeth said, not even pretending it was accidental. "I simply can't eat from a plate handled by someone who smells like a laundromat. I'm sure you understand." Sarah's eyes burned, not with tears, she wouldn't give them that, but with fury, humiliation, and the helplessness of someone who'd had to bite her tongue more times than she could count. Phones were out. Guests filmed in silence, lips parted in disbelief. Someone whispered, "That's Elizabeth Smith," as if that explained everything, and then a voice. "I think you owe her an apology." The voice wasn't loud, but it carried. From a nearby corner table, a man stood. He was tall, with a trim navy suit and a presence that silenced the room more than the broken plate had. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd run his hand through it too many times, and his eyes, sharp, steady, unreadable, were fixed on Elizabeth. She blinked, confused, and offered a thin, performative smile. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," he said, stepping closer. "Apologize. Right now." Elizabeth narrowed her eyes. "Do you know who you're speaking to?" "I do," he replied calmly. "Unfortunately, Gasps again. A few diners whispered his name. Sarah stared, breath caught. She recognized him now. William Smith, tech mogul, reclusive billionaire, son of Elizabeth, although they hadn't been seen together in years. Elizabeth looked like she'd been slapped. "You—" she started, but William raised a hand. "Not another word, Mother," he said, his voice low but sharp. "Not here. Not after that." He turned to Sarah. His expression softened, just slightly. "You deserve better than this," he said. "Much better." Then, without turning, he added over his shoulder, "You've gone too far." Again. A silence hung in the air so dense it could be sliced. Sarah felt every eye in the room shift back to her. Her hands were still clenched at her sides, her chest rising and falling like she'd just run a mile. She didn't know what to say. She didn't even know if she was supposed to speak. But William Smith was standing between her and the wreckage of that moment like a wall, like someone who, for reasons she didn't yet understand, had decided she mattered. Elizabeth, for once, was speechless. A manager rushed over. Apologies flew. Someone swept up the broken plate. The maitre d' tried to usher William away discreetly, but he shook his head. He turned to Sarah again. "Do you have a minute?" She hesitated. I'm working." "Not anymore," the manager cut in. "You're on break now." It wasn't a request. Sarah followed William through the quiet stairs, through the tension thick enough to choke on, past the windows that overlooked the cathedral, where light poured through colored glass and spilled onto the floor like redemption itself. Outside, the wind was crisp. William paused on the sidewalk and looked at her, really looked at her. "You're not the first person she's tried to humiliate," he said, "but you might be the last." Sarah didn't know what to say. Her world had just tipped on its axis, and the man standing in front of her wasn't a stranger anymore. He was a bomb that had gone off in the center of her carefully controlled silence. "Why would you do that?" she asked finally. His answer was simple. "Because someone should have stopped her a long time ago." The silence inside Leon hung heavy, broken only by the soft clinking of silverware and the buzzing of phones being unlocked. Elizabeth Smith, frozen mid-rebuttal, stared at the man standing before her, her perfectly poised expression cracking around the edges. "You didn't recognize me, did you?" William asked, his voice low but sharp. "Not even your own son." A ripple moved through the dining room like electricity. Gasps, eyes wide. One man dropped his fork. Elizabeth's breath hitched, her spine straightened as if bracing against a blow. For a moment, she looked less like a queen dethroned and more like a woman caught off guard, confused, raw, vulnerable. "William," she said finally, the word trembling out of her mouth like a secret. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer her. He turned to Sarah instead. "Come on. You shouldn't be in here right now." Sarah hesitated, caught between defiance and gratitude, pride and confusion. But something in William's eyes, not pity, not condescension, just quiet respect, made her feet move. Together they stepped out into the corridor as the whispers behind them grew into a storm. By the time Sarah made it back home that night, her phone had died under the weight of notifications. A neighbor's kid yelled, "Yo, you're on TikTok," as she unlocked her apartment door. Her hands trembled. She plugged the phone in. When the screen lit up, she saw her name trending. Waitress Gate. Elizabeth Smith exposed. She deserved better. Clips from the restaurant had already gone viral, shaky phone footage of the broken plate, the humiliation, and then William's stand. Some captions called it heroism. Others mocked Elizabeth's icy expression. A few tried to drag Sarah into conspiracy theories. She stared at the screen, sick to her stomach. Emma poked her head out of their shared bedroom, wrapped in her threadbare pink hoodie. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I don't know," Sarah whispered. Emma came closer, her breathing raspy but steady. You look like a badass in the video, just saying. Sarah almost laughed, but it caught in her throat. She hugged her sister tightly. That night, she didn't sleep. The next day, her manager called to say she was suspended, not for doing anything wrong, but for her safety. Paparazzi had shown up outside the restaurant. Protesters, too. By noon, an unfamiliar number texted her. This is William Smith. I'd like to speak with you privately, if you're willing. No press. Just me. Sarah didn't answer right away. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the message like it was a live wire. Why now? Why reach out? Because he felt guilty? Because his mother humiliated her? Because the whole country had watched? Her chest tightened. She thought of the bills piling on the counter. The pharmacy had called again that morning. The insurance wouldn't cover Emma's new meds. Her hands moved before she could stop them. Fine. One call, 5 minutes. The call lasted 30. William's voice was calm but not rehearsed. He didn't offer excuses for his mother. He didn't sugarcoat the fallout. She's spinning, he admitted. But I'm not here to defend her. I just wanted you to know I meant what I said. Sarah remained quiet. She crossed a line, he continued. A long time ago, actually. You just happened to be the one who made it visible. Sarah bristled. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No, William said. It's just the truth. Silence again. Then he added, I didn't want to do this publicly, but I know you're struggling with your sister's treatment. I made a transfer this morning to your hospital through my foundation. The full amount, no strings. Sarah froze. Excuse me? $120,000, he said. It should cover everything Emma needs. I know it's not a fix for what happened, but... No, Sarah cut in. You don't get to fix it with money. I'm not trying to fix anything, he said quietly. I'm trying to help. She stood, pacing her tiny kitchen, emotions warring in her chest. You don't understand what it's like to have people think you're only worth something when they're saving you, she snapped. I've spent my whole life proving I can carry my own weight. And you have, William said. That's why I want to help. Not because you need saving, because you've already saved yourself, and you shouldn't have to do it alone anymore. Sarah didn't reply. Her throat tightened. I'll respect whatever you decide, he said, but the donation stands for Emma, not you. He hung up. She spent the rest of the day in a fog. Her inbox flooded with interview requests, influencer DMs, hate comments, fan messages. A major news outlet emailed to offer her a platform to share her truth. Someone even offered to start a GoFundMe in solidarity. Sarah deleted the emails. All of them. She couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, not just in the world's eyes, in hers. That night, as she sat by Emma's bed, brushing her sister's hair back from her damp forehead, a memory surged up uninvited. Her father's voice, slurred and angry, the front door slamming behind him, the sound of Emma crying in the next room. Sarah, only 12, locking the door and dialing 911 with trembling fingers. She'd promised herself that night, never need anyone, never depend on anyone, never wait to be rescued. But maybe, just maybe, letting someone help wasn't the same as needing them. Meanwhile, uptown in her penthouse, Elizabeth Smith sat alone on her velvet couch, watching the fallout unravel. The media had turned fast. One day she was gracing society pages. The next, she was being crucified on cable news. Sponsors dropped out. Gala invites were postponed. Friends stopped returning her calls. Her PR rep had begged her to apologize, but Elizabeth refused. On camera, she doubled down. It was a misunderstanding. I'm deeply sorry if anyone felt uncomfortable. It didn't work. What the world saw was a woman too proud to say the word sorry. She turned off the TV and stared at the fireplace. Her eyes drifted to the framed photo on the mantel. Her husband, Peter, He was young in the picture, wearing a waiter's uniform. His arm was around her shoulders. She was smiling then, really smiling. That was the man who'd taught her to dance in the kitchen, who'd whispered dreams of a better life, who'd reminded her, constantly, not to forget where they came from. She hadn't just forgotten, she'd buried it. And now her own son, the boy she'd raised in penthouses and privilege, was standing on the opposite side of everything she'd built. Elizabeth reached for her wineglass, then paused. Slowly, deliberately, she set it down again, untouched. For the first time in years, her reflection in the mirror above the fireplace looked like a stranger. She couldn't hide from what she'd become. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a tiny voice whispered something unfamiliar. Not shame, not fear, doubt. Elizabeth Smith stood in the center of her marble kitchen, barefoot and still in her robe, the early morning light barely touching the surface of her silent penthouse. The espresso machine hummed behind her, untouched. On the kitchen island sat a photo, one she hadn't looked at in years. Peter. He was 23 in the picture, his dark curls slightly messy, his black vest crisp over a white shirt. His name tag, Peter S., sat slightly crooked on his chest. He was grinning, arm around a much younger Elizabeth, who wore no makeup and smiled like she had nothing to prove. They'd met in a hotel restaurant. She had been a guest. He was a server with ambition and the kind of kindness that made people linger. He'd brought her a glass of red wine she didn't order. "You looked like you needed it," he'd said. She had fallen in love with his warmth, his quiet confidence, his refusal to be impressed by money. And somewhere along the way, she'd become the very thing he used to tease her about. "You're turning into one of them, Liz." She hadn't noticed how far she'd fallen. Now, staring at the photo, Elizabeth felt something she couldn't name, a mix of shame, longing, and something darker. Grief. Not just for Peter, for herself. She was so tired of pretending. The next morning, she walked into a midtown office with no makeup, sunglasses pulled low, and a scarf around her neck. She gave the receptionist a false name, not because she was afraid of being recognized, but because, for the first time in decades, she didn't want to be seen. She sat on the couch in a private therapist's office, arms crossed. "I don't believe in this kind of thing," she said. Dr. Harris didn't flinch. "That's okay. You're still here." The silence stretched. Elizabeth stared out the window. Then, after a long pause, she muttered, "My son hates me." It came out harder than she expected, like she was spitting out a stone she'd swallowed years ago. Dr. Harris nodded, but said nothing. So Elizabeth kept talking. For the next 45 minutes it poured out. The pressure to maintain appearances, the death of her husband, the fear of becoming irrelevant, the disgust she felt when she saw herself in tabloids, not because of what they wrote, but because some of it was true. It became a routine, twice a week, no entourage, no media alerts, no lies. Meanwhile, Sarah moved through her days like a tightrope walker, balancing her job, Emma's treatment, and her final exams with practiced grace. She refused interviews, ignored agents offering book deals, blocked strangers who wanted to make her a symbol. Her focus was razor sharp: finish the semester, keep Emma stable, and stay out of the spotlight. She spent her evenings at the hospital studying while Emma dozed off beside her. Emma insisted on watching sci-fi movies and old comic book cartoons. It made her laugh, and when she laughed, her coughing stopped for a while. One night, when Sarah returned from grabbing food, she found Emma mid-laughter, flipping pages of an old comic with a stranger in a hoodie and a baseball cap pulled low. "Sarah," Emma beamed. "This is Will." The man turned. Sarah stopped. "William." He stood, a little sheepish. "I was just..." Emma asked about some science trivia, and I got carried away. Sarah narrowed her eyes. "You're visiting my sister now." "Not officially," he said. "Just keeping her company. She's pretty incredible." "So is her sister," Emma chimed in, winking. Sarah didn't smile. Not yet. But she didn't kick him out either. And from that night on, William started visiting more often, always without fanfare. Sometimes he brought books, sometimes puzzles, sometimes just silence. He never tried to talk about the past, he just showed up. The media storm slowly calmed. Another scandal took its place, but people remembered. Waitress Gate had shifted something. There were editorials now about class, dignity, kindness, about what happened when people stopped pretending. One afternoon, a hand-delivered invitation arrived at Sarah's door. From the William Smith Foundation, a private gala, benefiting pediatric hospitals. Sarah was listed as guest of honor. She stared at the envelope like it might explode. "Go," Emma said. "Seriously, wear that red dress, the one you never wear." "I don't have a red dress." "Then get one." Sarah hesitated. Her instinct screamed no, but Emma's eyes held something she hadn't seen in a long time. Pride. She nodded. The night of the gala, Sarah stood outside the towering event venue, heart pounding beneath a dress she could barely afford on credit. Her hair was pinned up, her heels were borrowed, and everything in her screamed that she didn't belong. But when she stepped into the ballroom, heads turned, not with scorn, but surprise. Whispers followed her, but not the cruel kind, curious, awed, some even admiring. William met her near the entrance. He looked cleaner, sleeker in a black tux, but his smile was still the same. "Glad you came," he said. "I almost didn't." "I know." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Then he led her through the crowd, introducing her to donors, doctors, researchers. No one asked about the incident. No one brought up his mother, until she appeared. Elizabeth stepped onto the small stage just as dinner was being served, dressed in midnight blue, no jewelry, no flash, just her. The room quieted. She didn't use a microphone. She didn't need to. "Good evening," she said. "Some of you know who I am. Most of you have seen my name in places I wish it hadn't been lately." Soft chuckles, nervous ones. Elizabeth's eyes scanned the crowd, then found Sarah. "I came here tonight not to defend myself, but to face something I've spent too long avoiding." She took a breath. "I hurt someone. Publicly. Cruelly. I humiliated a woman who did nothing wrong, and I did it because I was afraid, because I was holding on to an image of myself that I thought protected me from grief, from irrelevance, from my past." She paused. "And I was wrong." The room was still. She looked directly at Sarah. "Sarah Monroe, I'm sorry. Not because I got caught, not because people filmed it. I'm sorry because you didn't deserve it, and because I forgot who I used to be, the girl who once fell in love with a waiter and promised herself never to look down on anyone." Sarah's eyes burned, not from anger, from truth. Elizabeth stepped down. No applause, just silence, real silence. Then Sarah stood. The room turned. She didn't make a speech. She didn't smile. She simply nodded. And in that small, powerful gesture, something shifted again. The past didn't disappear, but it no longer held the same weight. Spring arrived late in the city. For months, winter had clung to the skyline, reluctant to loosen its grip. But on the morning of graduation, the clouds finally parted. The sky was clear and startlingly blue, sunlight bouncing off glass towers and warming the concrete below. Sarah Monroe stood in front of her mirror in a small rented room above a bodega in Queens. Not glamorous, not spacious, but quiet. Her white coat hung nearby. Her graduation gown rested neatly folded on the chair. Her stethoscope, A gift from Emma lay beside a handwritten card that read, "You were born for this." She had passed all her final exams with distinction, honors, commendations, offers from 3 residency programs. But none of it felt as heavy as the silence before stepping onto that stage. Behind her, Emma coughed lightly and peeked her head in. "Are you ready, Dr. Monroe?" Sarah turned, her eyes softening. "Not even close." Emma grinned. Her cheeks were rounder now, her energy better. The new medication, the one William had paid for, had changed everything. "You know you're gonna make everyone cry with that speech, right?" Emma teased. Sarah laughed softly. "Only if I don't throw up first." "Would you?" The auditorium buzzed with excitement, filled with families, professors, classmates, and the distant echo of futures just beginning. Sarah stood backstage, clutching her note cards, though she knew every word by heart. She scanned the crowd once as she took the podium. Bright lights, flashing phones. Emma was in the front row, beaming. And just behind her, 3 rows back, William Smith sat beside Elizabeth. He wore a navy suit, no tie. She wore a simple black dress, no makeup. Their posture wasn't stiff, but it wasn't relaxed either. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. There was something in the space between them, not repair, not yet, but acknowledgement. Sarah's gaze moved past them and settled somewhere else, somewhere above. And then she began. "When I started this journey, I thought strength meant doing everything alone," she said. Her voice was steady, but carried weight. "I was raised to believe that you don't wait for help. You carry what you have and keep walking." A pause. "And sometimes you walk with your head down, not because you're ashamed, but because you're focused on surviving." The audience listened, rapt. "But the truth I learned is that dignity doesn't come from how much you endure. It comes from how you carry yourself through it, and from how you treat others along the way, not just those above you, but those below, beside, and especially the ones people don't think are worth noticing." She looked toward Emma, who wiped her eyes quickly. "We talk about success like it's something earned alone. But I've learned it's never just yours. It's built by the people who held your hand when it shook, who reminded you who you were when you forgot, and sometimes by the people who stepped in, not to save you, but to say, 'You matter.'" A silence followed, a full one, not out of politeness, but respect. Sarah stepped down from the stage to a wave of quiet applause. It wasn't thunderous. It was reverent. Outside the auditorium, the air was crisp and golden. Sunlight poured through the stained glass of the nearby chapel, scattering colors across the sidewalk like a blessing. Sarah emerged slowly, her cap tucked under one arm, her gown flowing behind her in the breeze. Emma ran up to her and hugged her tight, burying her face in her sister's shoulder. "You did it," Emma whispered. "We did it," Sarah replied. A few steps behind them, William stood silently. Elizabeth remained a few paces back, watching with eyes that no longer tried to dominate the room. William met Sarah's eyes, offering a soft nod. She returned it. No big gestures, no declarations. Just a quiet, mutual understanding. What began in conflict had ended in transformation. Elizabeth reached into her purse and handed Sarah a small envelope. Not branded, not printed, just plain paper, sealed with a single initial, E. "I wrote this a while ago," she said. "Didn't know if I had the right to send it." Sarah took the letter. "You do." Elizabeth nodded once, then stepped away. No drama, no redemption speech, just action, just quiet. As the crowd thinned and the sun dipped lower in the sky, Sarah and Emma walked slowly toward the subway. Their shadows stretched long behind them. Sarah paused once, turning to look back at the chapel. Light danced across its stained glass windows, gold and crimson and blue. She smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because she'd finally stopped surviving. She was living, she was rising, and she wasn't doing it alone.